Before we start making the hat, let's take a look at the fabric parts. I used plush fabric for one ear. I used knitted fabric for the other ear. So even though we need 4 pieces for the ears, I only drew 2 pieces on the plush fabric. Next, we have these 2 side pieces. This side piece is drawn after completing one side. We flip it over to draw the other side. Let's talk about the fabric of this plush cloth. Finally, we have this middle piece. The pile of the fabric I'm using here is relatively short. It should be drawn the same way no elasticity. You can use long-haired or elastic plush fabrics. Actually, both are fine. It's just that the effects produced are different. Also, our regular plush fabric all have a direction. Here I have a piece of fabric with the pile of my fabric is relatively short. You can see the direction. It may not be very clear in the video. Let me show you. Take a look at the drawing here first. I will use my hand from top to bottom. There is an arrow present. You see the fiber direction is aligned. From bottom to top, it appears reversed. In other words, this is the direction of the fabric's fibers. When we draw, we always draw on the reverse downwards, but actually they are all the same. When we draw on this type of fabric, to the backside, you need to pay attention to this arrow. Downward. It should point in the direction of the hair flow. Next, the middle section and the ears, the direction of their fur pattern, all of them are directed downwards. Then let's discuss our 5mm seam allowance. The location of our side section, it features a provincial road. I didn't remove the ears. This location, just next to the adjacent piece, just like this in the video. Follow the outline above, cut along it. We'll work with another piece of fabric shortly. After we prepare it together, we will trim it. Of course, if you have already set it aside in advance, trim this down the seam to 5mm. It's also okay. It can also be inner dimensions of the lining. I'm using white aside from these 2 parts. This is to draw a medium section. The other areas, 2 side pieces will do. The side pieces are also drawn on both sides. Then we have this one. The drawing vertically, the colored pieces of the tiger whisker. When the fabric underneath here I'm using knitted fabric. We can draw the design. We need to pay attention to the direction of two of these colored pieces. Now we open it horizontally. We don't need to draw them separately. The pattern above consists of vertical stripes. Then later on one side, just sew along this line. After sewing, we will trim it again. Let's first measure the 4 side pieces. Let's measure this fabric aligns better, like this, because it's as if in a bottle. Sheer. Fold now, regarding this position of the 2 diagonal lines, how can we align it more accurately? Here we can use a bead needle or an awl. I'm using a bead needle on my side. Use the bead needle on these 2 diagonal lines at the very top. We'll push it through. Then pinch the fabric tightly. The 2 lines need to be aligned to the sewing machine. 2 tablecloths and 2 ceremonial cloths sewing. All are finally sewed to the tip of this method. After sewing, we will do some trimming, as shown in the video. Leave about a 3mm seam. Trim off the excess. After trimming this area near the sharp corner, we use scissors like this in the video. Cut it open. Be careful. Do not cut the stitching. Trim the other 3 pieces. Then we will sew at this spot. Next, spread it to both assemble the fabric. You can use an iron 2 side pieces and 1 make it a bit flatter. Pay attention to our centerpiece. This is a specific position. This is in the direction of the forehead being cut. Then the pointed area on top of the side piece. It is also oriented towards the forehead. We will align them together. This piece is the same as well. Sew along the stitching line. First, sew the central piece. As you sew, you should turn along these curves. This is oriented. It is suggested to secure it with this position faces towards the forehead, especially with plush fabric. It has a specific thickness. It tends to shift easily while sewing. Pay attention when driving. After finishing sewing, breaking the one side ends up longer. We're nearing the bamboo side ends up shorter. So you can secure it with a bamboo needle first, then we can start sewing continue again. Driving down. It will be easier to drive. Additionally, when we reach this provincial road, get off the vehicle. Once parked, it will look like this. Then we'll stitch the other side piece. This curved position is stitched together with this seam. Here is also facing each other. Fix it with a bamboo needle. After securing it, sew along the vertical seam line. Also remember, our direction to that provincial road should spread apart to both sides. After measuring, we will take these 2 sewn seam positions and trim them all. You only need to leave about 2 to 3 millimeters for the style. This is especially true for small-sized hats. Make sure to pay attention to trimming this style. Otherwise, let's flip it over to the front area is too thick, it will affect the hat. This is what the shape of the hat looks like. After we finish measuring, if there are no problems, we will continue to sew the lining with the same method. The stitching method for the 3 pieces of lining fabric is similar to that of the outer fabric. In
For
fact,
larger sizes,
they are pretty much the
leave
same,
just over 3 centimeters.
The only difference is that
You
we
only
need to leave
opening.
one of the side pieces.
The opening is left at this
The
position
other side piece
on one
can
of
be
the
fully
side pieces.
stitched. The stitching
For
method
smaller
is the same as
sizes,
earlier.
leave just over
We
2
simply don't
centimeters.
stitch this section of the opening. We start getting off the vehicle from here at the river head. The vehicle arrives
Here
at
we
the
need to make a
specified
few back
location.
stitches.
The designated
Skip
area
sewing
is
one
split
section
to both
of the
sides.
reverse seam.
Continue getting
continue
off the
sewing
vehicle
from the second marked
The vehicle
point,
stops,
at
then
the
sew
first
another
marked
side
point
piece
we just
indicated. Similarly, sew with the front sides facing each other. On this side, we'll sew everything directly. There's no need to leave an opening anymore. After sewing, turn it to the front, except for the hole at the opening we just mentioned. The shapes of the others are identical to
place
our
the
outer
fabric
fabric and lining fabric together with their front sides facing each other. Pay attention to the orientation. Align the position of the pointed corner with the other corner. Here we need to sew along the stitch line. Sew the lining and the outer fabric together. For example, I'll start sewing from this position. Then I'll go all the way around has already been left on the lining. To the tip
don't
at the
need to
front,
leave any
then come
reverse
back.
seam when we
Sew back to the previous starting point. You can choose any position you feel is suitable to start sewing. Mainly pay attention to all the seam positions we encounter. They should all be separated to both sides. Moreover, the lining and the outer fabric should be aligned. Then we also use a bamboo needle to
Just
secure
sew
it
along
along
the
the
edge
edge
to
to create a decorative stitch. After measuring, make some notches at the curved areas. Be careful not to cut into the seam when making notches. Then we focus on this sharp corner here. We need to make notches straight in like this. Again, be careful not to cut into the seam. Finally, we start from the opening of the lining. Flip the entire hat to the front. After flipping it over, slightly tidy and press the hat. Then, the main part of the hat is complete. Set it aside for now. Here we make the beard pad. The remaining two pieces of fabric are aligned. Then we sew along the edge of the red line. Here we don't need to leave an opening. Then follow the sewing line we just made. Leave about 2 to 3 millimeters as a margin. Cut out this pattern. Here we have 2 layers of fabric stitched together. Then we pull the 2 layers of fabric apart only on one piece of fabric. Then we cut a slit horizontally. The other piece of fabric is the front and should not be cut, because here I used the same fabric for both layers. So I didn't separate the top fabric from the bottom fabric. It's just the visible and the invisible. If your fabric has distinct layers, that means one piece needs to be on the front. If one piece needs to be on the back, then you need to cut this piece of fabric, tidy up the edges and corners. Then we can directly use stuff cotton into this cut opening. The amount of cotton should be just right, but it should be a bit fuller. There definitely shouldn't be too many empty spaces. The amount of cotton stuffing will also influence the final shape of your beard pad. The size of the beard pad, because after if there's too little, the more cotton stuffing you be able to form properly. The beard pad will get bigger. Then we'll sew this opening shut with a needle, because this part is on the back. In the end, it won't be visible. So the stitching method here is I don't use any hidden techniques, but if some of you ladies, you can hide techniques if you want to. Anyway, it won't be visible. About 2 millimeters in is fine. The key is the spot where we insert and pull out the needle. It's right at the edge of this fabric opening. Once we fold it to the end, we can finish the stitching. This thread is also on its outside. I mentioned this earlier. This is not visible from the back, so I didn't conceal it. After it is sewn up, we squeeze this beard pad with our hands. Adjust the position of the cotton inside. Ensure the cotton is evenly distributed. The entire shape is quite even. Make it a bit fuller. Then we take a 3-strand embroidery thread. Embroidery thread is usually 6 strands. We take 3 of them, with the front of the beard pad facing down. Then we take this embroidery thread, we tie it directly, then let the middle of it create this indentation. After I finish tying a knot here, I wrap the rope around once more and tie another knot. I think this method is a bit more secure. The black line in the front will also be more prominent. We can just tie a knot, because if you just wrap it around one of the strings, then the rope will get pulled in. I left the other position of the black line won't be very visible. I directly use this to stitch the dots on it. But if your line isn't long enough, that's fine. You can simply cut both of them off. Start with another line. The new line is likewise. Here we can cushion the beard. Secure this point in place. The position is approximately like this.
You don't have to make both sides
Make the two
perfectly
sides
symmetrical.
a bit more
You
symmetrical.
can also draw some more
or if you
casual
like a more
dots.
chaotic look, just adjust according to your own preferences. Also, if there are some friends, you have restarted with a new thread. Then place the end of your thread here. My thread can enter at this position here. It's where we have the sewn opening on the front.
After the
and
needle
back.
is out,
We hold this
then
thread
we
with
pull
our
the
left
needle
hand.
from this
The
point.
right hand
By the
holds
way,
needle. There's also this embroidery
wrap
thread.
around this line
It
as
is
I do.
still three-stranded.
After wrapping
embroidery
around
thread.
once,
we go back to the point where the needle came out. Here, pay attention to how we position this loop. This refers to the position where we wrapped around once. Bring it a little closer to the fabric. Next,
then our
we
needle
repeat
comes
this
out
method. From the side marking point.
We also create
Then we
the
pull
2
the
points
needle
on this
and
side.
thread out. Here,
When
in
we
this
make the
way,
third
the first
point,
point is
we
formed.
pay
attention to the needle, moving directly from the middle part to the other side. Now that this side has been pulled out, we repeat the method again. Then we also embroider the 3 points on this side. The exit position of the last point, it's right here on our back. After stitching 6 points, if the thread is long enough, we will proceed to the next step. If the thread is not long enough, you will need to start a new stitch. Here we need to place the beard pad. Place it on the forehead shoulder of the hat, a little higher. Align the needle and thread with this position on the shoulder. Let's go straight down. Stitch this line. Here, I have already determined the approximate position. Then remove the mustache pad first.
Then we will pass the
Then
thread
we will
under
sew
this
from the
mustache
bottom
pad.
outward.
Then
Put the
through.
mustache pad back. After passing
Adjust
through,
the position
we
yourself.
are readjusting the position of this beard
Make sure the
pad. Position is properly adjusted. If you feel satisfied, we will slightly adjust this surface fabric, that is, the surface fabric of the hat below. We will directly close stitches here. If you feel it is not secure enough, you can also sew a few more times. Then I'm using alcohol glue here, under this beard pad. Apply some
can
to
also
the
sew
lower
a little
areas
more
on
to the
both
sides.
sides. Then,
Next,
in this
sew
case,
the nose.
we will be more
For the
stable
nose, I
with the
use
hat
this kind of
itself.
pom-pom.
If you
This
don't mind
pom-pom
using
is
glue,
used for the nose.
then you should sew it
If
by
we are
hand.
making
a big-headed hat in a specific size, you can use it directly without trimming. I'm trimming here because I mentioned if we want to create a smaller cap, for example, 6 sizes.
Just make it look a bit nicer.
Other
when
hats that
trimmed.
are a bit smaller,
It just needs
this
to be
ball
a bit
is too
rounder.
big. If it's
The
too
step
big,
of sewing the
we can
nose,
use
I use
scissors
thread
for a
that
little
is similar
trimming.
in color to the hat.
Regular sewing thread is sufficient. On this pom-pom, we choose some fabric for it. Our needle can go through the loop of this thread at this end. We select a bit of the fabric from the hat itself here. Tighten
This
the
will
thread,
make it more secure.
then secure the pom-pom.
Then the
in
needle
this
is at this position
It doesn't
on the
feel very
whisker
secure.
pad.
You can sew a few more times. Sew the pom-pom and the underlying fabric a few times. Then make the stitching as invisible as possible. For the last stitch, we will secure the pom-pom and this tiger stripe pad our centered position. This way, it goes straight through. This can make them stick together more tightly. Then we just bring the needle and thread back a bit. Just find a spot to tie off the stitch. If it doesn't feel tight enough, you can also sew a few more times. This is what it looks like after the nose is sewn. This is what it looks like after the nose is sewn. This is what it looks like after the nose is sewn. This is what it looks like after the nose is sewn. The piece I used to make the ears here is plush fabric. One piece is knitted fabric. Pay attention to our knitted fabric.
The two pieces of
The
fabric
pattern
are
on
facing
it
each
is
other.
currently vertical
At this
like
position
this.
at the bottom,
We
leave an
place
opening
it
for
vertically
it.
like this.
Sew the fabric
then
together,
stack the ears
except
on
for this
top
opening.
like this. Except
The
for
two
the
pieces
seam
of
at the
fabric
reverse
are
opening.
facing each other.
For the remaining areas, after
will sew
measuring,
along this
we will
red
cut off
line.
the ear sections. This segment has a reverse opening. We leave a 5mm seam allowance. For the remaining areas, leaving about 3mm is enough. At the positions of the 3 pointed corners, we will trim this seam slightly at an angle. Sew the opening closed yourself
not to
using
cut
the
the
long
stitching
stitch
line.
method. Then we will start
Sisters
from the
who don't
reverse
know the
opening.
long stitch method
Turn
can
the
take a
ear
look.
to the front. We have a separate tutorial
Organize
for the long
and
stitch
lightly
method
press
in
it.
our folder. Then use the same method
Moreover,
to make the
we
other
are using
ear. Plush fabric after all. While sewing, some fluff may have been sewn in. Later, you can use a needle to gently pull it out like I do. If a longer plush
Including
fabric
the
is
main part
used,
of our hat.
the area where
In
the
some
fabric
areas,
gets caught,
if the fabric
will
gets
definitely
caught,
be larger.
it should be removed.
Everything needs to be
The
picked
short
out.
plush
I use is a bit better. Now let's look at the position of the ear seam. First, let's look at this position. This is the seam where the crown and side pieces of the hat are stitched together. and the position of this dart. We need to sew it with a bit of curvature like red thread. It will look more natural. Then we take out this ear. When we sew the ear, I'll show you with the bottom edge facing up. It's slightly curved like this. At the point where the dart meets the side seam, move it back a bit. Here, I'll sketch out the approximate path. This is approximately where we will sew the ears later. Sew it over while bending it this way. Because if you draw it at this position on the other side by yourself, I will also draw it directly for everyone. We should aim to draw it symmetrically on both sides. Then when we sew later, it will also be more symmetrical. Additionally, this position is adjustable. You can also sew the ears position to suit your preference. I'm just saying that the position where I sew the ears looks like this. You can also start sewing from the main body needle and thread competition. Just try to hide the thread end as much as the bottom edge of this ear. Then align the ear with the path we just drew, this red line. Then take a bit of the fabric from the surface of the hat underneath. Do not sew into the lining of the hat. We sew the ears here. We only sew the ear itself and after the outer fabric of the hat. We start from the bottom edge of the ear. Then we push the needle and thread from the back to the front. It's about 1 or 2 millimeters up from the bottom edge. Don't go too high up. If it's too high, the stitching will be visible. After coming out from the ear, we then continue on the outer fabric of the hat below. Pick up a small piece of fabric, stitch the needle forward. And thread come out from here for better understanding. So I raise the ear then a bit higher. Then we go from this position when you sew at the bottom edge. You don't need to pull it up like this. Then we will continue to repeat this step. Pick a little bit of fabric towards the back. Next, we'll stitch from behind the ear to the front until we have completed stitching the entire bottom edge of the ear. Then wrap the thread around twice. When you reach the side edge, then just tie off the thread. We can arrange some fabric on the outer layer of this hat. We insert the needle from this position into the lining, then trim the excess thread on this side of the lining. Next, we will sew the eyes. For the eyes, you can first find their position and make a mark. Also, the one I'm using has a loop at the bottom, so it can be sewn directly. There are many types that can be used for eyes, such as round black beads or flat ones, which can be glued directly. It all depends on your personal preference. I sew the eyes a bit above the edge of the mustache pad, and you can adjust their position according to your preference. Just ensure they are symmetrical. There are no special techniques for sewing the eyes here. Just ensure they are sewn securely. If you don't want the thread ends visible on the front, you can hide them shown in the video. Slightly open the area of the reverse seam. We hide the thread end at the back of this needle point, and here we finish the other eye. Repeat the stitching using the same method. First, there are various methods to create this mustache, and many materials are available for purchase. I prefer to use the materials I have on hand, and here I'm using this rust-colored thread. We cut the rusty wire into segments, initially making them a bit longer. We will trim them later. Let's leave each segment at about 7 or 8 centimeters. Then we separate each piece of rusty wire into strands. A piece of rusty wire typically has 6 strands, right? So it can be split into 6. For one hat, we need exactly 6 strands for the whiskers. Underneath here, I placed a card, and we directly applied the acrylic medium on top. Everyone knows that the acrylic medium hardens the applied material, so we can use this property to make the rusty line harder, giving it a more whisker-like appearance. Coat each one with the acrylic medium, and when it's partially dry, we can peel the whiskers off the card. Try not to wait until it's completely dry, because if it is, it's easy to tear the underlying card too. When it's partially dry, we remove it and set it aside because I was busy with my own work. I forgot about this beard, so I'm actually waiting for it to dry completely before continuing, which makes it a bit more challenging. So everyone should quickly take it down end of the beard and dry, and thread the other end, set it aside to use once it's completely dry. Directly engage from a less visible area underneath the beard pad. The needle's exit point is located at the sides of this beard pad. Repeat this method and properly attach the mustache on both sides. If you think the mustache is too long, you can trim it later after we finish everything. For the little hat on the cap, we don't need lining, just sew the outer fabric. First, take 2 pieces of outer fabric with the front sides facing each other and sew along one side. Sew along this side edge from top to bottom, following the red line. After finishing, we unfold the style at this position, preferably using an iron to press it. We take out the third piece of material. Align it with one side of the 2 pieces we just sewed together, ensuring the right sides are facing each other. You can choose the right or left
Sew
side,
from beginning to
whichever
end,
feels more
ensuring this
comfortable for
position
you.
is stitched on both sides.
After a good meal, we will take the seam we just stitched and spread it apart on both sides. Then we will place the two finished parts together, facing each other. Since the hat I'm making is quite small, I will hand stitch the middle section. This way, the pointed areas align better. This needs hand stitching, but if you feel confident, you can also use the machine to sew it directly. After stitching the middle section, we can finish it off by tying the thread. We can connect the front and back positions using a running stitch. After stitching, we will also separate the fabric at this position to both sides and iron it. After processing, the back looks like this and the front looks like this. Here we have left two pieces of fabric, both made of 60-count washed cotton, stacked together like this. The front sides should be facing each other. Sew an additional 5 millimeters at the front and back. We will follow this line, also adding an extra 5 millimeters. Just sew along this line. Then we will cut out this pattern. For the areas that are not sewn, we will leave a 5 millimeter. For the area we just sewed, we will trim it with scalloped scissors. If there are no scalloped scissors, just create some notches yourself. Then we unfold the two pieces of fabric and align them with their backs facing each other. They were originally facing the front. Now turn them to face this area for a flatter finish. Backs are together. For those who fold the visible line well, let's add another 1 millimeter fold on top. Next, we need to add 2 decorative straps on top. If you prefer not to use glue, you can sew it on. I use glue directly here because this area is curved, making it easier to adjust the shape. There's not much skill involved with this strap either. Just make sure to use a proper amount of glue, neither too much nor too little. Next, ensure that some areas are quite wide, straps, while others are narrow. Adjacent spacing is fairly Position the finished vent rock next to the main part. Ensure that the front sides of both the finished main part and the vent rock are facing upward and outward. This means that the front of the main body is aligned with the back of the protruding rock. Then we directly sew along the upper and lower. Before sewing, let me explain the position of the final seam, which is at the protruding rock. Our final method will be to fold this position inward towards the back. By folding it this way, we can cover the underlying stitching and prevent frayed edges. Then use a little glue to secure this area. Now let's officially start sewing. Since the hat is small, this part may be a bit challenging to sew. If you can't manage, just hand sew it. Don't sew it all the way. Stop about 5 millimeters from the starting point. After sewing, it looks like this. You can see it's open on this side. Because we have left about 5 millimeters length to the starting point, we need to trim the excess part slightly before folding. Here we can first locate the position where we start sewing, where there is a sewing guideline the excess part over the guideline we just draw it out first, extending 5 millimeters beyond it. Then trim away the excess part. Look here, we are exceeding the guideline below by 5 millimeters. Next, we'll fold in 5 millimeters. This way, it will perfectly align with the line we just drew. Isn't there a small gap in the position we discussed earlier? Let's stitch this small section together to fill it in. Finally, we'll glue this part together. Then we directly fold this position along the seam inward. Because this size is relatively small and there is no inner lining, we can just fold it in like this. After all, this hat is going to be sewn onto our cat hat. Of course, if you want to make an inner lining, that's also fine, but it's not really necessary since this hat is indeed quite small. After folding this position in, you can iron it lightly. The video we stitched onto our cat's head features decorative fabric, but what we're making now does not include it. I initially made it with decorative fabric, but later deemed it unnecessary. While this lacks decorative fabric, so I canceled the stitching position aligns with that of the hat, both in the folded horizontal area, missing only a piece of fabric. Next, we move on to the decorative part. Here, I cut a ribbon, shaping one end into a small design. This one features a fur threading pattern, but other decorative buttons or embellishments can also be used. Then we sew a
Note that the
decoration
hat
on
has
the front of
seams
the hat.
towards
the back. The trimmed ribbon is placed behind the front of the hat, and the buttons are sewn
There's
on
no
the
special
front. technique for sewing here. Just sew it tightly. You can sew a few extra stitches, and then we will finish the stitches at the back.
Finally, we sew it onto the top of this furry hat. You can tilt it a bit or keep it straight, based on your
Alternatively,
preference. You can first put the hat on the child, and then choose the position. If you don't want to sew, you can use glue to fix it directly. However, if you suggest using glue, you will have
After
to
we
hand
select
sew.
the
position, we use this pen to roughly mark the circle's position, which is the bottom edge of the hat. Additionally, for the opening inside the hat, you
I'm
can
a bit
sew
lazy
it using
with
a
the
long
samples
needle
here,
technique.
so
I didn't sew it. It just clips on like this all around, and you can't see the inside. Next, we will sew the hat and the marked line together using the long stitch method.
You can also use other sewing methods. Just make sure the thread is not visible and that it's sewn securely. Here, I am stitching directly from the edge using the long stitch method, and we take the needle exit position as the reference. At this position in this round, we continuously stitch on this side of the furry hat. We will adjust the fabric following the marked stitch.
Similarly, make sure not to sew into the inside, just stitch
Next,
the surface.
using the same long stitch method, we adjust slightly at the top and a bit at the bottom fabric. Then sew the entire circle together. Please like, subscribe, share, and support Mingjing and the Diandian program. After being fully stitched, it looks like this. There's one more question. Because our lining and outer fabric are separate except at the edges, the other areas are all separate, so the edges are prone to curling outward. Here we can find a few places to secure it. That is to secure the lining and the outer fabric together. Before fixing, let's first organize the lining and the outer fabric. Let's arrange this
I just
seam
happened to
area.
secure it
For
at this
example,
junction
this
of the
area in
provincial
front.
road.
We can move the needle and thread inward from the seam area next to it. Because in our sewing, there is space between each stitch. The
There's
thread
always a
will
slight
pass
gap.
through this gap. This
Insert
method is
through this
relatively
gap,
more discreet.
then pull it a bit
This
tighter.
fixed stitching doesn't require much technique. We simply sew the lining and the outer fabric together a bit. Isn't there a provincial road
When
here?
sewing the outer
The
fabric,
provincial road
you
has
just need to
thicker
sew
seams
right
in that
to its
area.
connecting seam.
Don't sew to the front of the main fabric. Just pick up a few stitches right above the seam.
Then we will directly pull
You
the
can
thread
sew a
next
few
to it.
stitches at the same spot. After pulling the thread, it's fine.
Then go
once
back
it's
to the
solidified,
spot
where the needle doesn't exit. Then pull it out in another spot. Trim off the excess parts. The right side has already
left
been
side
sewn.
hasn't been sewn yet.
You can see that
This
the lining
here
tends to
stays in
fall out
place.
more easily. Then we'll use the same method. Let's tidy up the other side as well. Sew a few stitches in the same
It's
position
better to secure it at this stitching
You can also
position.
find a few spots
For
on the
instance,
back to secure
this
it.
middle piece.
Generally,
and this
I
side
feel
piece.
that
The areas where it is sewn also have stitching. You should find a few
here
points
we
on your
apply
own.
some powder
Just
on this
secure
side
it
of the
a
ear.
little. If there's
Then
no
we use
powder,
the long needle
you
method.
can also use
Sew
the
blush.
inverted part properly.
Here
we should pay attention to the depth of the ear area, then slowly blend it outwards.
Then apply a little blush.
The upper part shouldn't be
The
as
position
deep,
of blush
so
is
it's
right
okay
next
for
to
the
the lower
eyes.
area.
This
to
is
be a bit
roughly what it
deeper.
looks like when all.
Here we first create the upper part of the skirt. The front and back pieces of the fabric should face each other. Sew the shoulder seam in place. After inserting, spread out the front and back pieces. The design is divided towards both iron to smooth it out. You can scratch it with your nails. Then we prepare a whole piece of lining fabric. The size of this lining fabric is just a bit larger
we need
than
to
our
sew the
main
neckline
fabric.
in the middle.
This is how it looks
the
once the
positions
front and
for
back
the
pieces
embroidery
are opened
hoops
up on either side.
It just needs to
This
be a
is
little
how
bigger.
it looks once it's stitched together. Then let's do some trimming. The three positions we just
For the remaining
stitched,
areas,
we will use
pinking
regular
shears.
scissors. Cut along the edge of the fabric. Sisters without lace scissors. Do it yourself in the curved areas. Make some cuts into it. This is how it looks after cutting. Then we start from this front position. Pull the fabric from this seam. Here I'm using a straight punch. If there is no straight punch, then you can only take a look. Are there any other small tools? Anyway,
because
as long
most
as
of
it
the
can
time
handle
we
three
do it
sides,
this
that's
way.
fine.
After
And
clamping
typically,
it down,
I would say here,
the
I would
fabric
hold
will
this
have some
lining in
wrinkles.
place, although it can all be ironed in the end.
So we will
But
do our
some
best
fabrics
here.
have
We
specific
still need to pull the fabric.
characteristics.
Once the
It's
fabric
just
is
that
pulled
after
over,
you wrinkle
we should
it,
stop
it's
using the
difficult
straight
to
punch
feel dizzy on a
because
flat
you're punching
surface.
too hard. It can easily rip the fabric. Switch to
It is
using
done
your
in the same
hand.
way. Gently
Pull it out
work
from
with
the
this
front.
fabric. After finishing
Arrange
the
it
surface
properly.
change, we tidy up the
Another
edges
thick
and corners.
slice.
Gently press it with an iron. This is what it looks like
Unfold
after
them
pressing.
separately.
Next, we will
Combine them
process
together.
this. Face fabric
The
to
side
face
edges
fabric,
of the front and
lining
back
fabric
pieces.
to lining fabric.
We will work
The
on
middle
these
seam
two
should be
areas.
aligned. We sew directly along the style line. Then pull the other side. This side is also unfolded on both sides. Then align them together. Sew along the style line. After the measurement, we will separate the patterns of the two positions just now. Separate them to both sides. Then we will combine the outer fabric and the lining. The hem is indicated on our drawing.
This part is
It is
done for
noted
now.
here. Then we
This
will
is the
keep it as a
style.
backup.
The two
Let's
long
first
edges
handle
at the
the
top
hem.
and
Bottom need to be decorated. The short edges on both sides. Do not need
You
to
can just
add
cut off
decoration.
that style.
If some sisters are
Then we
involved,
take this short
we've already
edge
added
as
some
the
style
reference
on both
point.
sides. At about
It's also
2.4
fine.
centimeters above it, draw a line on it. When it's done, it looks like this. It's the position my finger is
prepare a
pointing at.
ruler like
It is
this.
2.4
3
millimeters on it. Here we
5
draw a line
millimeters,
that appears to be
a
melting.
scale
of 7 millimeters. This kind of ruler. We use this to draw skirts with pleats. It will be a bit more
Then our line is
convenient.
based on the first
Similar
line we
ones
just
at
drew.
home can also be used.
Then draw
That is to say,
upwards.
if there aren't any,
I have already
you can
written
buy
the
some. Intervals on the drawing, the size of our skirt hem. The following statement. This has been briefly described. According to
This
what is
refers
written
to the
in the
line
drawing,
for each
for
pleat.
example, a spacing of 7 millimeters, you draw a line every 7 millimeters. A spacing of 5 millimeters, you draw a line
Regarding
every
the final
5
position,
millimeters. There
what
are
is the
comments
specific
about
amount?
it being inaccurate.
According to
or
the
perhaps
numbers
a bit
written
more.
on the drawing.
No need to worry
Keep
about
drawing
it,
over the
because
entire
originally
skirt.
this skirt hem has a bit
On
of
the left
extra
is this
length.
vacant spot.
Then we need to
move in
fold
this
the bottom
direction.
edge inward.
Let's
Fold
pay
this bottom
attention to
edge
this
inward
part.
first. Here I'm just going along the edge. Fold this to make a crease. Just fold
Secure
it
it
towards
along
the
the
backside
edge
while sewing. The side of this fabric
As for
that
this
is facing
thread,
up,
I am
is the
accustomed
front.
to
Fold it
measuring
on
1
1
side.
millimeter. If you all like it, measuring 2 or 3 millimeters
Measure up
is
5
fine.
millimeters,
Then
and
we
draw
refer
a
to what we
line.
just discussed.
Take out this
Use
strap,
the bottom edge of
the
the
left side of the
completed
strap.
line as the reference.
Align
it with the edge of this line. Here you use a sewing machine. You can still stick it on, it's your choice. If you prefer not to use glue, you can use sewing
Be
instead.
mindful of one thing while side stitching. For instance, this strap I'm using, it is thicker than that type of silk ribbon. It will be a bit thicker. However, the fabric underneath is quite thin. In this situation, the fabric itself may have some wrinkles.
It's easy after
So
finishing
when we
the
are
drive.
driving, you need to pull the fabric underneath
the hem of this
slightly.
skirt, pull it back, meaning pull it toward your body. After sewing this way, the fabric underneath won't bunch up. If you prefer,
I'm here
you
on
can
this
also
strap.
draw one line.
I've drawn
It
2
really
lines.
depends on your personal preference. After measuring the strap, we will fold the piece. First, fold the first line we drew from the left, this red line. Fold it towards the back as shown
use
in
an
the
iron.
video. If you're using
Here,
a
I'm
water-based
using a
pen,
hot pen.
you can iron it a bit. After ironing, this area will be smoother. Using a hot pen like I do, you can only scrape it lightly with your nails. After folding,
there is the
it looks
third
like
line.
this. We skip these
Then we
two
look at the
lines
second line next
towards
to
the
it.
position of the fourth line. Start folding again. The method is the same as when folding the first line. After folding, we still leave 2 lines empty. Then fold it at the next line. That means
Until we
to fold
finish
once
folding the
every
entire
2
hem
empty
of the
lines.
skirt.
This is what it looks like after everything is folded. We fold it every 2 lines. Now we begin to fold this part. Starting from the section at the beginning where no lines are drawn. Start folding the first line from
Align the
this
third
end.
line.
Fold it over like this. Align the fourth line with the sixth line. Fold it over again. That refers to the position of all our creases. Align a line before the next crease. Here I'm folding this pleat, while sewing along this position on the right. When sewing, we sew
Because
a bit
this
to the
is
right
a
of
temporary
this line. Fixed line. We haven't finished stacking all the folds here. There are still a few lines left. This is because we already have a reserved section. Let's start by counting the folds. I have written it on the drawing. How many folds are there in total? Count from the left. The first fold on the left side. This is a fold. Count to the right like this. Indicate a few folds on the blueprint. You can fold a few more. If we end up counting too much here, Then you can just take it apart. If you miss it, just stack it up again.
There will
Also,
definitely
when
be some
everyone draws
discrepancies,
lines, and when
this
we
part
fold
of the
car's
discrepancy,
paper, we just need to follow what's on my drawing for the car. Wait a moment while we combine the parts together. Let's take another look. If there are many
it's not
errors,
too many,
we
that's
might
fine.
need to increase or
Then we
decrease
first need
the
to
number
press
of these
this fold.
folds. Earlier, we only secured the waist. The lower part is still uneven. Here, we need to align each position, align downwards along the waistline above. Here, I
Then use an
manually
iron to
iron
smooth
it
it
one
out.
strip at a time. If you have any tips, you can also use your own methods. After everything is ironed, if you have this kind of masking tape, we can organize this document well. Then we can secure this position with tape. The main purpose
Have
here
many
is that later
operations,
we
right?
will
The subsequent operations will allow us to fold it easily. It will get messy again later. So we will temporarily secure it like this for now. Later, we will finish almost everything. Just
Then
give it a
we will
quick
remove
ironing
this
at the
tape.
end. It's
You
best
don't
to
need
use
to keep
masking tape for
organizing and
this
ironing it.
because this tape doesn't have a very strong adhesive. You must not use double-sided tape or similar. Just a moment, it can't
Anyway,
be torn
let
off.
everyone decide
If you're sure you
according
can
to
tear
the
it
actual
off,
situation.
then
Then we
it's
will
fine.
begin at the blank area on the left side of the skirt. Use the edge as a reference. Draw a line 7 millimeters inward. This position
the
is
inner
exactly
part of the
7
bodice.
millimeters. Align the bodice hemline.
Take out
with
the upper
skirt
part of the
hemline.
skirt.
This is the front side facing each other. This initial position, the edge of the style line at the top is 5 millimeters. The bottom edge is 7 millimeters.
You don't need to worry about
so the
this.
bottom will be wider
We
than
only
the top.
focus
on the other design lines. Then follow the side seam of this style line on the right. When you quickly sew the side seam to the thick piece on this side at the end. Let's stop and take a look. It's the final pleat of our skirt. It's the position at the nearest edge. How much distance is remaining? Here, it needs to be at least about 1.5. If the difference is significant, you need to make adjustments to this section. After the adjustments are made, let's
will
review
then complete
after
testing
finishing
the
the
remaining
testing
parts.
here. This is the position at the very end on our side. There are multiple parts here. Here we need to trim the excess. Be careful
Draw
while
a line
trimming.
downward
We need
from
to
this
keep
point.
away from the
Then
previous
trim away
edge.
the section to the
It's
right
about
of
2
the line.
millimeters from this
Once
point.
trimmed,
It looks like this. Take a look at the skirt's hem. This design will add approximately 2 millimeters more than the top part. The starting position here is
It also
the
adds an
same.
extra
2 millimeters. Here, it has increased by 2 millimeters. This is mainly because we will soon apply it to both sides. When folding the edges inward,
That
like
means
this,
all have
we
removed
are
5
removing the visible
millimeters.
line from the front. If the design
According
here
to my
is only
settings,
5
I have all
millimeters,
removed
then I will sew a
0.5
5
units.
millimeter line. The edge position may not be accessible, so I leave a 7 millimeter margin here. It's just 5
This way we
millimeters
can stitch
along
more
the jacket.
easily.
If
Then
you finish
add
the
2
edges on both
millimeters.
sides,
Overall, this adds
do
up
not
to
use
7
a
millimeters.
0.5 stitch. You prefer sewing with a 3 millimeters thread. A 2 millimeters thread works too. So you can
Now let's
simply
work on
trim
the
off
bottom
the
edge of
excess
the
2
lining
millimeters
in the upper section.
Trim along the edge of the top
Fold directly
section.
along the style line.
Fold the reverse side of the fabric. Because this fabric has a lining, we are using
If you're
a
concerned
one-piece
that this
method
fold
for
won't be precise,
so it may not
you can
have the
start by
style
drawing
line
a line
drawn on it. In any case, we just need to fold it in evenly by 5 millimeters. After folding, we move to this side edge position.
We will
which
combine
refers
the
to the
lining
lining
and the outer
and the
fabric,
outer
so
fabric.
that the fronts
The
face
location
each
of the
other.
opening at the back,
The edge at this location. We will begin sewing down from the top. We take care to pay attention while sewing.
this horizontal
the position
fold,
of the lining
it
along
is
the bottom
exactly
edge
aligned.
and the
After
position of the
making
fabric at the
adjustments,
skirt seam.
Then we'll get off the vehicle from the top down to here. It's fine if the vehicle stops right at this position. Once the vehicle is ready, it looks like this. Then we will use the same method. Sew up the back opening on the other side as well. Similarly, follow this 0.5 seam line downwards. Additionally, pay attention to one more point. If we leave an extra 2 millimeters at the hem of the skirt, then after
2
measuring,
millimeters
it will
will
still
disappear.
have an extra 2 millimeters.
When aligning, make sure
It
to
won't be
align
due
with the
to our
seam line.
current sewing at
If
this
this side has
position.
also been measured, we will trim the seam at the top right angle. Be careful not to cut into the line. Just
After
make a
trimming,
slight angle
we
trim.
turn the fabric to the
Both
right
sides
side.
are the same.
Organize it at a right angle. You can use tweezers to hold it. Then we will arrange the bottom edge of the lining again. Once the lining is properly folded, its folding position, it should align perfectly. The position of
with
this
this
suture
position
on
is
the bottom
obscured.
surface. Then we use the long needle technique. Align the position with the suture line. Stitch the position of the suture together, or just like I do. Once the bottom part is folded properly, secure the waist area directly to the marked line at the front. This is what it looks like after folding to the marked line. Next, we will address the positions on both sides. Here, we directly fold the bottom hem of the skirt.
Fold it inward like this.
Just fold it in.
If you haven't left a 7
millimeter
allowance,
follow the edge of the
just need
upper
to
part.
fold it in along the upper part. Then we go down in this manner at the collar, a whole length of this 5mm thread.
If it's in a
Be
more
careful
edge
while
area,
sewing. If you use that decorative masking tape to secure it,
we shouldn't
this
pull the
masking
tape while
tape
sewing the lines. Both sides of this area need to be sewn. Then my habit is to start from this position at the bottom. For the collar, I sew a line that is 5 millimeters upward. Then bring it down from the other side. This position at the collar. Finally, we sew hidden buttons or Velcro on the back. Then we tear off this painter's tape, iron it again. Our garment is ready. Finally, we sew hidden buttons or Velcro on the back. Then peel off this masking tape. Iron it again. Our garment will be ready. Let's first take a look at this collar fabric. I haven't drawn the diagram for the collar on the right yet. I'll first explain using this diagram. The sewing method for these two collars, the collar on the right is positioned between the 2 points. It's just that the position of the reverse side is slightly different. On the left, it will probably be placed at this position. Then, do not sew the reverse opening position. Provide it with 2 pieces of fabric, all seams one above the red line drawn here for the remaining positions. The front sides are facing each other. These two collars have several pointed corners. There are two corners at the bottom collar. Then there are corners on the top collar here. There are more pointed corners. To make it look better after flipping it over. These pointed corners will look better positioned. Leave a piece of thread about 7 to 8 centimeters during the sewing process. For example, this collar I'm demonstrating has 4 corners. We prepare 4 threads. Then we begin sewing from this point sewing until one stitch. There will be a right angle at this spot below. Make sure to stop right after we sew 1 stitch before this corner. You must not stop only when you reach this position. Next, we are at the spot. Let me demonstrate this ahead drawing. So in other words, draw a red position of our corner is at the bottom ahead. We need to pause here. Then we take out a sewing thread. We separate the 2 layers of fabric. Then we insert our thread. The needle is positioned in the center. Please note that it should be placed in horizontally. This thread is being held by our needle. Then we sew another stitch forward. This stitch reaches the corner position. At this point, this thread is now behind our stitch. Initially, it was in front of it. Then we first pull out both ends of the wire, then pull it outward slightly to check. Check whether this wire is secured behind it. Be aware that you should pull it outward like this simultaneously. If it is properly directly secured, pulled this wire then this wire cannot be pulled out. It indicates that this step was not done well. The situation when the operation is performed correctly. Let's move these 2 lines to the left side simultaneously. Then we'll keep driving forward. Put it in the back. Drive to the position of the other foot in any position in the car later. Repeat this step. We still have 3 feet left here. Then we all use the same method. Insert the sewing thread. Then we cut the collar to another point at our reverse corner. Leave more fabric at this position of the reverse corner. Leave a standard allowance of 5 millimeters. There are also some curved areas fabric allowance trimmed for the other positions. If you don't have scallop scissors, 3 millimeters. You can make some notches yourself. For the positions of the legs, but be careful at an angle thread at the position of our type of foot. Just give this style definitely a slight cannot trim. Cut the thread. If you're unsure, then don't cut. Typically, this type of white fabric is used. We are at the position of shine a light on it to take a look. Insert this straight Everyone piece can see into this line. Secure some fabric once inside, it has been trimmed properly. Then pull it outward. Don't use too much force when flipping it over. Don't tear the fabric. A thread has Let's 2 take a look segments. After flipping it over. We need to tighten both segments. Each of our feet has a line in its position. You cannot pull just one segment. Pulling just one part will pull the thread out. We will outline the positions of these 4 legs. You can see where this leg is positioned. This leg will collar look more as appealing. A whole. After the collar is properly pressed, we start from the position of the reverse edge. Thread the ribbon. I will need to remove the basting stitch later, so I didn't tie a knot. If you don't remove the main line, or if you're afraid of blowgut, you'd better make a knot inside. We remove all the basting stitches along the edge of the collar on the other side. The basting stitches can be a bit tricky. Threaded properly. If you're not confident, just remember, just iron it flat. Then sew the reverse edge. Then I marked lines at the edges of both collars. This is the 2 indicates the position for the embroidery thread on the collar. This line is approximately from the edge. It's roughly
Here
5
we will
millimeters.
embroider the line on the collar.
If you prefer it
Here
a bit
I'm
narrower,
using
3
embroidery
millimeters
thread
is also
If you
fine.
like it thicker,
It depends on
use
your
3
preference.
strands.
I prefer to use 2 strands for finer work. And then there's this embroidery
If you've
thread.
patched enough,
We should
you'll have
leave
to
the
patch
length
again.
a bit longer.
The
to
needle and
prevent
thread
having to
enter
sew
from
halfway
the
later.
edge of the collar.
Then there's the tail end of my thread.
You should
I
only
haven't
leave
tied
the
a
thread
knot
end outside
because this embroidery
Begin
thread
at the
is
starting
somewhat
point of the
thicker.
red thread.
If you tie a
Pass
knot,
the thread
it
through the
won't
needle.
fit. Don't pull all the thread in. Let's leave a bit outside first. Put a little glue at the end. Don't use too much glue. Then
Here
we
I
pull it
am
inside.
about to come away from the needle.
Fix it inside the collar. There's about 1 centimeter left, just right to hide this wire, hidden beneath this red wire. This way, when we sew the thread later, it should cover this red wire.
This includes how we finish the
Sometimes,
stitching
if
at
the
the
collar
end.
is see-through,
It's done
you won't
using
be
the
able to see
same
the
method.
threads inside. The thread should also be passed through, hidden under the embroidery thread. Make a mark for each small segment.
3 to 5
I will make a
millimeters is
few
fine.
here.
If it's 3
When everyone is
millimeters,
sewing on their
then
own,
everything
just
is
have a
3
rough idea
millimeters.
in mind.
If it's 5 millimeters, then everything is 5 millimeters. Avoid having one section
I don't
too
mark
wide
this point
or a segment that
The
is
purpose of
especially
marking this
narrow.
point is to
Make
help
it more
everyone
even.
understand
If it's a
the
normal
needle and
stitch.
thread return to where we started, then emerge from the first point drawn. Check the position
Then we
on
wrap
the back.
this thread around
The
the
back
front
is
of the
clean.
needle.
We only
At
stitch
this
the top
point,
layer of
pull
fabric.
the needle out.
This thread is formed in the previous step, inside this loop. Here I will insert another part of this embroidery method. I've also marked
Because
I
I think
think
the
the
line
line
in
in
front
front is a
will
bit too
embroider
dark.
along this
I
point.
can no longer see
It's the
clearly.
same
as at the beginning. From this point where the needle exits, we will go in again. Then from another point, this point next to
We
it,
bring
should
it in
come
front
out.
of the needle.
Do
That
not
is,
pull the
move
needle
underneath
out
the needle.
immediately. At this moment, we pull
We
the
place
thread
the thread
out
like this.
This thread is now inside the previous loop. Pay attention, it's inside the loop, not outside the loop. Let me pull it a bit.
Then we
here for
pull
you to
this wire
see.
a bit tighter,
But
but
you
really
also
tight.
can't pull
The
it too
fabric
tight.
is
all wrinkled up. This won't work either. Just flatten that coil on top and it will be fine. Keep the fabric wrinkle-free. Insert
This
the needle
coil
again.
is also not loose.
Pay attention to the position.
Then we go to
where
the
we
point where
insert
the needle comes
out. This needle also goes in from the coil. Then move slightly away from that point. Then insert the needle again. Now we can use
your
the
right
left
hand to
thumbnail
wrap this
or the
thread to the
fingertip.
front.
Press the previous
pull
loop
out the
down a
needle
bit and thread. This means we have completed 2 loops. Keep repeating the steps until we finish stitching all the threads on the entire collar. Then we insert
need to
the
tidy
needle
up
back
the
in.
stitches now.
Then we make the stitch at this side position. The needle comes out at this position in the direction
make
of
the
pointed
thread's
corner
end.
slightly wrinkled.
It
It is positioned
Then we
just
trim
beneath
this
the
excess
excess
part.
part. Pull this thread a bit
Slightly
tighter,
trim
it, leaving a little bit of thread. Just like at the beginning. Use a little glue. If you don't like glue, you can
If you're
actually
not
avoid
intentionally
using glue
pulling
like
this
I do.
wire out,
It's actually
this
okay
wire won't
due to
actually
this
fall
kind of
out.
position. Then we pull the fabric back. The thread end is tucked in. Finally, we attach the collar. We bring together the positions of the 2 front
If
legs.
you want to use the
If
button
it's a
plate,
ribbon,
then
just sew
tie
it a
it.
bit. If our collar is aligned, it also has a part like this. This is the small bow tie at the bottom. This small bow tie has its ends. There is also
Give it
a
a moment
relatively
to put
sharp
it in.
corner. The
So
2
here we
pieces
do
of
the
fabric
same.
are facing each other. Cut 2 pieces
Then
of
roughly
sewing
at this
thread. Position. Leave a reverse opening for it, except for the reverse opening position. All other positions are side seams. Find the sharp position, remember to put the thread in, then cut off the collar. Leave a 5mm seam at the reverse side. The rest of the area has curves. We can use the edge cutter. There are no scissors for drawing edges. Just
However,
use regular
there's a wire
scissors to make
positioned
some
inside the
notches.
sharp corner.
The locations
you're
of the 2
uncertain,
pointed
then
corners.
avoid fixing this
You can
area
slightly adjust
so
the
as not
design
to
here.
cut this wire.
Trim a bit
Then we
more.
proceed from the opposite side.
Flip this
We also
part of
pull
the bow
these 2
tie
wires
underneath.
tight simultaneously.
After flipping it over,
pull out
the
this
position
pointed
of the
part.
wires
After
at
pulling
both
it tight,
ends. This thread can be removed now. Then we tidy up the entire bow tie. Iron it briefly. We first
Sew the
orient
back
it towards
with
the
a
long
long
needle method. Fold it in this way. This part after it's been properly
Then take
processed.
this part
at the bottom. Then fold it back in half. The upper part is also folded backward in half. Also, I want to point
However,
out that
if
what
you
I'm
are
working on
working with a
here
larger
is a
size,
small-sized
you can
item.
fold it a
Here,
few more times.
folding it 3 times
Then we
is
position the
sufficient.
center
of the bow tie. Use QQ thread to wrap it tightly. If there's no QQ thread, prepare the bow tie
regular
that is
thread
already
to
made
tie
in
it
advance.
tightly.
Let's
First,
take care.
fold
Fold
it
it in
as we can
half to
secure
locate
this
the
side,
center
that's
of this
fine.
front part. Draw a line on it. Make a mark. Take this section at the front, fold it in half in this direction as shown in my video.
The section that is folded down
Then
is
fold it
wider.
down by
We can
1/3.
fold it
The
several
upper
more
part
times.
is the same as well.
It's folded upward by
Fold it
1/3,
forward
by approximately 1/3, then fold it back by 1/3. Just tidy it up a bit. It seems there are no issues. We are also using QQ. Tighten the center
Then
position.
we place the little bow tie we made earlier,
line in front.
place
Place it at the bottom. Continue using the QQ line. The positions of these two wires, twist them together. Prepare it for later after it's done. Then we
Take
fold
a small
it
piece
slightly.
of fabric.
Use the
As for
folded
this position,
fabric as a reference.
just make sure it's not
We draw a
smaller
5
than a 3
millimeter
by 3
line next to
centimeter
it.
square.
Then we sew along this line. Gently trim the seams. Leave about 2 millimeters
You
for
can
the
simply
seams.
flip it over.
If you are
Flipping
relatively
it over
skilled
by
at
5
flipping,
millimeters
you
is
can
quite
refer to it
difficult.
as sisters. We have another method here. Use a finer pen or needle. First, open the position of this channel like this. Then we move the seam to the center
It looks
position.
like it's flipped over.
This way it looks
The
good
front
from
side
the
is
front.
very clean.
Then we take out the front collar, encapsulate the position of the thread, place the joint at the back of the collar, just glue it tightly. Only release
Here
your
I'm using
hand after the
alcohol-based
alcohol glue
glue.
has dried. Just trim off
Then
the
our
excess
collar is
parts.
ready.
Here at the back, we can use either conceal. Here we make hats using 6 pieces of outer fabric and 6 pieces of lining. Here, both the outer fabric and the lining are made of the same 60-count water-based cotton. After the pattern is drawn, we add a 0.5
pieces together as a
cm
group,
seam allowance,
taking
taking
2
2
outer
outer fabric pieces with the right sides facing each other. Sew along one of the side edges, ensuring to sew all the way
After
to the
finishing,
end on both sides.
we unfold the design
This
at
is
this
sewn
position.
along the position of my red
It's
line.
best to iron it with an iron.
Then we take out the third piece of material. Align it with the side of one of the 2 pieces of material we just sewed together. It's also oriented face to face. You can prefer either the right side or the left side. It's up to what feels right for you. It should also be sewn from end to end, stitching both sides. Once completed, we'll take the stitched piece from earlier. It's also about letting it separate towards both sides. You can press it with an iron. Once completed, there will be a total of 4 parts like this. Then I have 2 here. We'll place these 2 right sides together. Here I use the same fabric for both because the
outer
lining
layer
fabric
and the
needs
lining.
a turning opening. If you have
So it
both the
needs
outer
to be
fabric and
clearly
lining
distinguished.
fabric, then you are
Here we
sewing
can
the
either
outer
use
fabric
hand
first,
sewing
or machine sewing. I would personally start by hand sewing this middle part. It would be more accurate. It is a hat that
Because
goes
the
on
fabric
top of another
pieces
hat.
of our hat
Of course,
are quite
if you feel
small.
confident. Sewing it directly is just the same. I think hand sewing is easier for alignment. This spot in the middle, aligning a few pointed corners. The middle section is hand sewn. Next, we just handle this middle section here, machine stitched. If you prefer everything to be hand sewn, of course that's also fine. Or it's also fine to use machine stitching for everything. Look at your own choice. Seal up the middle section. Then we can tidy up the stitches. We can connect the front and back positions with a chain stitch. After sewing, we will also spread the stitches at this position to both sides. Iron it with an iron. This is what the back looks like after processing. This is what the front looks like. Then we sew the lining. The method for the lining and outer fabric is actually the same. It simply means there's an additional notch position on the lining. I probably set aside a position between these 2 points as a notch. If you are worried that the notch is too small and difficult to handle, of the remaining stitches
you can also make the
have
notch
all
a
been
bit
sewn.
larger.
I didn't hand
Except
stitch
that the
this
notch
lining.
position
To
remains
save time,
unsewn.
I sewed it directly. After sewing, we also spread the stitches to both sides. Iron it lightly, there's a hole here. This is our reverse opening. Then let's work on the brim part. First, let's take a look at the image of the brim. If it's a large big head hat or a small cap, this pattern only has
There will be
one
a symbol
half
at this position.
After we finish painting this side, we need to flip it over to paint the other side. The middle cannot be cut, it must stay connected. Here we have 2 pieces of fabric left.
Sew an additional 5
mm
washed
cotton
seam.
at the front and back.
Stack them like this.
We follow this line
Place
to come
them
out
face
like
to
this.
face.
It's also an additional 5 mm. Just sew a seam like this. Then we cut out this diagram. There are areas without stitches.
we leave a 5 mm seam allowance. This is the position that was just sewn. We use an edge cutter to trim the edges. If there is no edge cutter, them with the wrong sides facing cuts ourselves. So it turns out they face each other. The two pieces of fabric. Turn it to the front like this. The reverse sides face each other. This position of the fold. Use an iron to press it. Withdraw another bright relatively flat 1 mm on top. It will be a bit flatter. Sisters who are good at withdrawing, then we need to decorate with 2 support straps on top. If you mind using glue for this, you can sew it on with a sewing machine. It's easier to adjust this shape here. Even this strap doesn't require much skill. If you use glue, just use an appropriate amount of glue. Not too much and not too little. Then the spacing between the two pieces. After applying the fat tape, is quite uniform. Now we will take out the lining. Some areas of the table are quite wide. Note that some areas are quite narrow. This side is glued with adhesive tape, and this side faces the front of the hat lining. At the beginning, we leave a 0.5 seam allowance. And then there is our lining. It should not be a position for a reverse opening. This section is not One edge has a reverse opening left, hat rock joint. This is what we have now. This starting position can be placed following the circumference of this reverse opening. Let's begin measuring the seam line on the brim of the hat. Make sure to pay attention to where we insert the needle. It should be at this 5 mm. When we get close to the start, we can't start sewing from the very beginning because later we still need this initial 5 mm back. First, we will flip it over like this. This way we won't hit it. Then we keep driving forward. It's roughly at the edge from here. Leave a few millimeters of space, or you can park your car perfectly. We can move away from the starting position, leave another 5 millimeters of space. Then we stopped. After testing, we opened this area to take a look. There is a gap in the middle, a gap of a few millimeters. The edge of the fabric of the hat itself. Next to the hat itself, place this part of the hat rock, attach this seam to it. Cannot sew to the fabric of the hat itself. After the test, let's turn it over to check this side. Check the position of this seam. Is the fabric beside it smooth? Is there any stitching on the fabric of the hat itself? If everything is normal, there's no problem. Then we turn it to the wrong side. Trim the excess fabric from the seam. Leave a 5 mm because there's a small section at the front. Then we open the seam to both sides. There are a few millimeters. We'll repeat this position, sew this edge, repeat and sew a small segment. This way there won't be any gaps in between. Once sewn, we align this part with the front side of our fabric. We assemble it together like this. Next, we sew around the entire edge. Sew the lining and outer fabric together. This one is relatively small. If you find it hard to sew, you can just sew it by hand. Try to use the cloth we just sewed for the hat rock. Make sure to face the top side up. This way, we can see we just stitched this sample from the cap rock. Sew along this sample from the cap rock. After all the sewing is done, we will slightly trim the stitching in this area. A thickness of 2 or 3 millimeters is sufficient. Then we turn the ceremonial fabric inside out. Flip the hat to the right side. I replaced the fabric Originally here. It was red. The process now is the same. Black. You can see my strap because the fabric has been changed here. This is what it looks like after flipping it over. Then we use a steam iron to press this hat. Everything needs to be organized in the main part of the hat. Then we are at this spot. The areas on the visible front and back. If you feel the visible line is hard to work with, you just need to iron it well. Anyway, I have the clear thread for the car here. This way, the car is done, hat will be complete. We will turn this cap. Now we will demonstrate the long stitch method. First, the end of the thread is hidden inside the fabric. We need to pull the needle out from inside the fabric. Aligning with this needle exit point, we insert the needle into another piece of fabric above. Can we see it clearly from this point? This point is the same as that point. Then we enter from this side and come out from this place. The distance between the needle entry and exit here is about 3 millimeters. You can make it a bit denser when you do it, and that's fine. Next, we also enter the needle at the same spot on the cloth below. The needle should be positioned about 3 millimeters away. This next step is also a repetition. It's simply a matter of doing it up and down repeatedly. After completing the reverse stitch, you can tighten the thread. Simply pull the needle through and tie a knot. Then insert the needle into the fabric. Just pull. Next, we will make socks. The reason I didn't mention from the beginning where to start sewing is, it's because if the sewing position is on knit fabric, you fold it down like this. When it's very short here, it's difficult to sew with a home machine. Let's leave a little more for it first. After the car is done, we'll go pick it up. To make the stitching on our socks more secure, let's fold it down first. You can take a look, mark these points. It's this point. On the other side, this side is the front. Mark the points on the edge of the sock. Take a look, this is the front. Then we draw the line on the reverse side. After marking, fold it along this line. The place where we put the needle is at the point we marked. First, we backstitch 1 or 2 stitches to secure it. Then continue sewing forward. When the car reaches this point, then move the car forward by 1 or 2 notches and also reverse 1 notch. All right, we have now reached the new point. Then backtrack 2 notches, stop. Continue walking forward. Walk to this point. Then stop again. Stop, stop. Keep walking forward. Keep walking forward. Walk to this point. Then stop again. Also go back 1 or 2 steps. Continue walking forward. Continue walking forward. Walk to this point, then continue the previous operation to rewind the needle. Then continue the previous operation to rewind the needle. Let's take a look now. Why do I need to rewind the needle at this point? When we cut later, we will cut along this edge like this to create a little seam for cutting. There are times when we have to reinsert the needle. We often wear and remove it like this. It will be more secure. This thread won't come loose. Now that the thread has been pulled, let's cut a little, just like this, flat. Cut off the excess seams. Don't cut this line. 3 to 4 millimeters outside this line is fine. If you cut it this short from the beginning, then when you go to cut it again, the edges won't be as easy to cut. Okay, now it's after we finished cutting, fold it like this. These are all the wrong sides. The marked areas are all the wrong sides. Besides the right side, we made a few marks. The socks are folded in half. This line runs along the edge. Unpick the seam. After sewing, move outward along the edge, about 3 or 4 millimeters. Cut off the sock, the area with a larger curvature. You need to cut an additional opening. Be careful not to cut into the seams. Also, don't cut too deep. After you finish cutting, flip the entire sock inside out. The socks are ready. Let's take a look now. This is the sock that has been heat pressed with designs. I applied the heat transfer on this side. The side is this way. Iron it directly here. Then this is ironed on the front side. Just do it like this. The side seam is at the back, and then it's ironed flat like this. Then regarding my socks, it is the ankle area. It is naturally narrower. If you like it a bit wider, you can refer to the one from 2 episodes ago, that Christmas drawings design.